This is the story of Ethan Calloway and his wife Clara Calloway. They had built something that looked, from the outside, like a life most people would envy. A restored brownstone in a quiet part of the city, a marriage that had survived a miscarriage and 2 cross-country moves, a shared language of small gestures that had once felt like fluency. But languages go unused, and what had once been intimacy had slowly become habit, and what had once been habit had slowly become performance. Ethan was the kind of man who confused stability for contentment, who mistook his wife's silence for peace rather than distance. Clara was the kind of woman who had spent so many years making herself useful that she had forgotten to ask whether she was happy. The story of how they ended is not a story about betrayal. Not exactly. It is a story about 2 people who stopped looking at each other long before the night one of them stopped coming home. The morning of the Hargrove Foundation Gala, Ethan stood at the bathroom mirror, trimming the edges of his beard, and Clara moved behind him in the reflection, opening a drawer, closing it, opening it again, and neither of them spoke. This was not unusual. Their mornings had acquired a choreography that required no direction, no eye contact, only the shared understanding of who needed the sink first and whose coffee went in which mug. "Do you know where my pearl earrings are?" Clara asked. Not to him exactly, more to the room. "Same place they always are," he said. "They're not." He rinsed his face. "Check the ceramic dish by the window." A pause. Then the soft sound of her finding them. He watched her in the mirror as she fixed the earrings, her chin tilted up slightly, her expression the particular kind of neutral that took years of practice to achieve. She was wearing the navy dress, the one that made her look like someone important, which Ethan supposed was the point. The gala was a fundraising event, but more honestly, it was a gathering of people who needed to be seen by other people who needed to be seen. Clara had insisted they attend. Ethan had agreed because agreeing was easier than asking why. They had been married 11 years. He remembered with the odd clarity that sometimes comes when you are not trying to remember anything. The night they met at a graduate school reception, Clara arguing with a professor about urban planning policy, her voice steady and precise, not loud but impossible to ignore. He had been struck by her the way you are struck by someone who knows exactly what they think. He had spent the following weeks trying to become someone she would find interesting. He wondered not for the first time when he had stopped trying. Their relationship had many of the textures of closeness. They cooked together on Sundays. They shared a streaming account and argued mildly about what to watch. They attended the dinners and the birthdays and the work functions that constitute a shared social life. But the texture of closeness and the substance of it are different things. And Ethan, if he was honest with himself, had not been honest with himself in quite some time. Clara worked in development, not the technical kind, but the philanthropic kind, cultivating relationships between wealthy donors and worthy causes. She was good at it in the way that people are good at things that ask them to perform warmth rather than feel it. Ethan ran a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in restructuring family-owned businesses, and he was known in his field as someone who was careful, methodical, and slightly difficult to read. These were not entirely separate things. They had discussed children again last winter, or rather the conversation had surfaced and then submerged again, the way conversations do when both people know the answer, but neither is ready to say it. The miscarriage 7 years earlier had changed something between them that they had never fully named. Clara had grieved loudly and then gone quiet about it forever. Ethan had not known how to grieve out loud, and so he had not, and the silence had become its own kind of wall. The gala was held at the Alderman Hotel. Marble floors, chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, the particular smell of expensive flowers mixed with expensive perfume. Ethan arrived separately from Clara. She had gone ahead to manage the pre-event reception for the foundation's board members. He found his name badge, took a glass of sparkling water, and spent the first 40 minutes in conversation with a man named Douglas who managed a hedge fund and talked about his boat without apparent irony. Then Ethan looked across the room. Clara was standing near one of the tall windows with a man Ethan did not recognize. Tall, perhaps 60, silver-haired in the way that money sometimes makes men silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than a month of their mortgage. This was not unusual. Clara was always near someone. always mid-introduction, always in the process of making someone feel seen. But she was not shaking this man's hand or laughing at something professionally. She was leaning into him, her shoulder against his chest, his arm around her back, her fingers at his lapel, in the way that people lean into each other when the world around them has contracted down to just the two of them. It was not aggressive. It was not theatrical. It was quiet and easy and entirely without self-consciousness, which was the worst part. Ethan stood with his sparkling water and looked at his wife leaning into a stranger and felt something shift inside him. Not rage, which he might have expected. Not grief exactly, but something older and quieter, like a door he had not known was still open, swinging slowly shut. He set his glass on the nearest tray. He found his coat at the cloakroom. He walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and left the hotel without speaking to anyone. Outside, the November air was cold and very still. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the traffic moving past. Then he put his hands in his pockets and started walking, and he did not call a car for a long time. He did not say anything when she came home. Clara arrived just after midnight, moving through the apartment with the careful quietness of someone who expected to find the other person asleep. Ethan was sitting in the armchair near the window with the lamp on and a book open in his lap that he had not been reading. "You left early," she said. It was not a question, but it was not quite a statement either. It occupied the uncertain territory between them, waiting to see how he would treat it. "I had a headache." She set her clutch on the console table. "You could have told me. You were busy." A beat. She looked at him, directly, briefly, and then moved toward the bedroom. "I have an early call." "Okay." She paused in the doorway. "Was it bad? The headache?" "It's better now." She nodded and she was gone, and Ethan sat with the book in his lap and the lamp burning and thought about nothing useful for another hour before he finally went to bed. Over the following days, he did not confront her. This was partly because he did not yet know what he wanted to say, and partly because he understood himself well enough to know that speaking before he was ready was something he had never been able to do. He was a man who processed in private and spoke in finished sentences, and the sentence he needed was not yet finished. Instead, he watched, not with suspicion, or not only with suspicion, but with the particular attention of someone who has been given a new lens through which to observe something familiar. He noticed how often Clara's phone was face down. He noticed the way she deflected questions about the gala's outcome with professional summaries that answered a version of what he had asked, but not exactly what he had asked. He noticed that she came to bed later than usual, and that when she did, she slept on her side, facing away. None of this was evidence of anything. All of it was. On a Thursday evening, they had dinner together. Pasta, a bottle of Berbera they had opened 2/3 of the way and then left on the counter. Clara was talking about a new portfolio the foundation was considering, a water access initiative in the Southwest. And Ethan was listening in the way he had learned to listen that looked like engagement but was something cooler, more observational. "Marcus Faney is apparently interested," she said. "Had you heard of him?" The name moved through Ethan's chest, the way cold water moves through a space. "Vaguely," he said. "He's been in private equity, infrastructure mostly. He's been shifting toward impact investment, which is—" She paused, gestured vaguely with her fork, unusual for someone with his profile, but the interest seems genuine. Ethan looked at his pasta. "How did you meet him?" "Through the Hargrove network. He came to the gala, actually." A silence opened up. "He seemed serious about it," Clara said. "The initiative. He asked good questions." "I'm sure he did." She looked at him. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She held his gaze for a moment longer than usual, and in that moment Ethan understood with a clarity that was almost calm that she was not innocent, but that she was also not entirely guilty, that whatever was happening was more complicated than either of those frames, and that the complication would not make it hurt less. "Ethan," she said, and then stopped, and then started a different sentence. "We should probably talk about the Marchetti dinner next week. Are you going to be in Chicago?" He let her redirect. "I can move some things," he said. Later, while they were cleaning up, Clara was standing at the sink with her back to him, and Ethan was drying a wine glass, and she said, almost absently, almost to herself, I don't know, maybe people watching this, and she stopped, and Ethan looked at her. What? She turned slightly, something briefly strange crossing her face, as if she had heard herself from outside, like this story, or, I don't know, subscribe or something. The words came out with an odd, hollow lightness, and she blinked. Ethan stared at her. What are you talking about? She shook her head slowly, turning back to the sink. I don't know what I just said. He set down the wine glass. Are you tired? Yes, she said after a beat. I think so. And they finished the dishes in silence, and neither of them mentioned it again. It happened on a Saturday, not because Ethan had planned it for Saturday, but because Saturday was the day he found the emails. He was not looking for them. He had borrowed Clara's laptop to print a shipping label, and her browser was open, and the inbox was visible, and the thread was near the top, and he read 3 lines before he understood what he was reading. The emails were not love letters. That was the first thing that surprised him, and then he was not sure why it had. They were practical, discussing timing, discussing leverage, discussing the way Ethan's name and Ethan's firm and Ethan's professional credibility could be positioned in conversations with the Hargrove board to make Vane's interest in the foundation seem more legitimate. Clara had written, he won't be a problem. He trusts me completely. He trusts me completely. Ethan closed the laptop. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he stood up, and he made coffee, and he waited for her to come home. She arrived around 2. He was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs, a choice that had been deliberate, that he had thought about and considered and decided was the right shape for what was about to happen. Clara came in the door and read the room immediately, the way she always could, and she stopped just inside the kitchen. You were on my laptop, she said. I was printing a label. She set her bag down. Her face was doing something careful, not guilty, not defensive, not the usual repertoire. Something more guarded than that. How much did you read? She asked. Enough. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She did not reach for the coffee. She folded her hands on the table and looked at them, and Ethan waited. I want you to understand, she said finally, that it was never meant to hurt you. I know. She looked up. That doesn't make it better. I know that too. A long pause. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone's dog was barking at something and then stopping again. Vane approached me 6 months ago, Clara said. He was looking for a way into the philanthropic space that would insulate his other interests from scrutiny. He needed a face, a context. Our name, your name, gave him credibility that his money alone couldn't buy. And you agreed. I was going to. She corrected herself carefully. I agreed. Were you planning to leave? She didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. I didn't know what I was planning, she said. That's the honest thing I can tell you. I was tired, Ethan, not of you specifically, of us, of what we'd become or hadn't become. Vane was interested in me in a way that felt, she stopped. It doesn't matter how it felt. Tell me anyway. She looked at him with something that was almost grief, like I was visible again. He absorbed this. He drank some of his coffee. He thought about the word visible and what it meant to feel its absence, and he found that he could not be entirely without understanding for her, which was the most painful part of all of it. I'm not going to shout at you, he said. I know. I'm not going to ask you to explain yourself more than you already have. She nodded, eyes down. But I need you to understand, he said, that what I read was not a love affair. What I read was a transaction, and that I was the currency. She didn't argue. She sat with it. Ethan, I think you should stay at Rachel's for a while. A long silence. Okay, she said, very quietly. He stood up. He carried his mug to the sink. He looked out the window at the back garden, the bare November trees, the neighbor's fence that had been leaning for 3 years and had never quite fallen. I'll send you what you need, he said. The following months had the quality of controlled demolition, deliberate, unhurried, nothing collapsing that was not already structurally unsound. Ethan did not move with anger. He moved with the methodical patience that was when he examined it. The thing he had always been best at. The patient accumulation of information. The careful assessment of exposure. He contacted his lawyer not to punish Clara, but to understand clearly what was his. He transferred several personal assets into a separate account, legitimately, transparently, on the advice of counsel. He notified his bank of the separation. He changed the passwords he needed to change. In parallel, and with a detachment that surprised him, he spent several evenings researching Marcus Vane. It was not difficult. Vane had managed to construct a surface that was largely clean, but Ethan's work had trained him to look at the undersurface, at the way money moved, at the pattern of restructured entities and offshore registrations, at the particular geography of a financial history that kept passing through certain jurisdictions for no evident operational reason. He found a financial journalist he had met at a conference 3 years earlier. He sent a careful, documented, entirely unremarkable email pointing toward several public discrepancies in Vane's foundation-related filings. He attached nothing that was not already a matter of record. He did not tell Clara. He did not need to. Clara, for her part, had moved into a furnished apartment near her office and had begun the process of reframing. Not to others, not primarily, but to herself. This is the necessary work of someone who has behaved badly, without being able to call it simply bad. The gradual construction of a narrative in which she becomes the product of her circumstances, rather than the author of her choices. She had been lonely. Ethan had been absent. The marriage had emptied itself out long before she had made any decision. These things were all partially true, which made them very useful. She met occasionally with Rachel and one other close friend, and the version of the story she offered them was not dishonest exactly. It was edited. Vane's name came up only as a professional context. Her own role in what had been planned was reduced to a vague proximity rather than a willing participation. She did not quite lie. She chose, with the precision of someone who has done this before with less serious material, which truths to voice and which to keep. The guilt lived underneath. She was not without it. It surfaced at odd hours, during a work call, in the middle of a meal, once while standing in a grocery store aisle, looking at a brand of pasta sauce that she and Ethan had always bought. And she would feel it as a kind of pressure at the sternum, and then she would move away from it, back into the edited version, which was survivable. In March, a financial journalist's article appeared in a regional business publication. Small circulation, carefully sourced, raising questions about the legitimacy of several of Vane's recent foundation affiliations and flagging inconsistencies in his regulatory filings. It was not explosive, it was not front page, but within certain circles it was noticed, and within those circles it spread the way these things spread, quietly, efficiently, fatally. By April, the Hargrove Foundation had quietly begun distancing itself from the pending portfolio relationship with Vane. By May, there were 2 federal inquiries. Ethan read about these developments the way he read market reports, with attention, without emotion, filing the information in its appropriate place. He did not feel vindicated. He did not feel much at all, which was either a sign of health or of damage, and he was not sure which. He had, over these months, begun running again, something he had abandoned in his early 40s, and he had started having dinner once a week with his brother in New Jersey. And he had begun, slowly and without fanfare, to recognize the shape of a life that was his own rather than a compromise. This was not happiness yet. It was something quieter than happiness and more honest. Clara called in June, not to say the things he might have anticipated, not to beg or to argue or to offer the full accounting of herself that he had once, briefly, hoped for. She called. He understood when he answered, because she needed to hear his voice and did not know how to explain that, without it becoming something she could not manage in a parking lot, which is where she was. "Are you in the middle of something?" she asked. "No. I read about Vane." "Yes." A pause. "Did you?" she started, and then stopped. "Don't ask me that," he said, not unkindly. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear the ambient noise of wherever she was: traffic, wind, the hollow quality of open space. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," she said. "I know, I wanted to hear how you were. I'm all right." He looked out his office window at the city. "I've been running again. You always said you would. Took me a while." Another pause. This one was different, fuller somehow, less defensive. The pauses between them had always carried information, and this one was carrying something that resembled grief, and also, faintly, something like gratitude, though what she was grateful for she could not have easily said. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know you know that, but I needed to say it without a lawyer in the room." He let the apology sit. He did not dismiss it, and he did not gather it up and offer forgiveness in return, because he was not there yet, and because he had learned slowly, over these past months, that one of the things he had always done in their marriage was to resolve tensions that deserved to remain unresolved, to smooth over things that deserved to remain rough, and that this instinct, however well-meaning, had cost them both something real. "I hear you," he said. "That's all you can give me right now." "Yes." She exhaled a long, careful breath. "Okay. Clara." "Yeah." "You were visible to me," he said. "I want you to know that. I didn't show it in ways that reached you. That's not an excuse. It's just something I needed to say." The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. He imagined her in the parking lot, the June sun, the particular quality of stillness that comes just before you decide to keep going. "I think," she said slowly, "that we made each other small, without meaning to." "Yes. And then we couldn't figure out how to make each other large again." He didn't respond. There was nothing to add to that. It was the most accurate thing either of them had said about the marriage in years, and it had arrived now, at the end of it, the way the right word often does. Too late to save anything, but precise enough to mean something. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too." She hung up, and he held the phone for a moment, and then set it down on his desk. He went running that evening, a route he had learned over the past few months, through the park and along the river, and back up through the older residential streets where the trees had grown tall enough to arch over the road and meet each other in the middle. The light at that hour was the particular gold of early summer, and it fell through the leaves in the way that light falls when no one is performing for it. He was not happy. He was not unhappy. He was, for the first time in a long time, inside his own life rather than adjacent to it, neither performing stability for Clara, nor managing her silence, nor quietly absorbing the slow erosion of something he had not been brave enough to look at directly while it was still happening. He thought about what she had said. "We made each other small." He turned it over as he ran, the way you turn over a stone. Not to find something under it, just to see what is there. There was grief in it, yes. There was also something he could only call relief, which felt wrong and then felt honest and then simply felt like what it was. The sensation of a weight lifted, not because the weight was bad to carry, but because you have been carrying it for so long, you had stopped noticing the effort. And now that you have put it down, you can feel for the first time the simple fact of your own legs. He ran until the gold light went out. Then he walked the rest of the way home. He did not love back. Some marriages do not end in screaming. They end in a phone call in a parking lot. They end in two people saying the true thing too late and accepting that late is what they have. They end in a man running along a river in June, learning to carry his own weight, which has always been there and which is, finally, only his.